Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews, and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigus.
Welcome everyone to the very latest Fly Culture Podcast. I'm really pleased to be joined by Spencer Durrant, fly angler, writer, and news editor for the online fishing resource Midcurrent. Spencer, it's good to have you here. It's my first transatlantic podcast. How's it going?
Oh, it's going great, man. It's great to be here as well. And this is first transatlantic podcast for me, too. I've never done a trans-Pacific one either. So, I mean, at some point, we're going to have to get somebody from Japan or something, and have to do one that way so I can cover both ponds. But
cover the world.
Exactly.
And I thought it would be really interesting for our listeners to listen to you talk a little bit about the fishing that you're doing over there. And you're in a part of the world that's really interesting to me from a fishing point of view. For our listeners, Spencer's real passion is trout. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But we'd been talking coming into the podcast, and he'd just been back from Nevada, where he'd been fishing Pyramid Lake, which you may or may not know about. Spencer, do you want to tell us a little bit about it first, actually, and then I can ask you a few questions?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you don't know about Pyramid, I'll start with a little bit about Pyramid. It's big freshwater lake out in Nevada, just north of Lake Tahoe. So it's in that area. It's real close to California. And it's remnant lake of a big prehistoric lake called Lake Lahontan. And the fish just grow in there like they're on steroids. It's ridiculous how big some of those fish get. And the world record cutthroat was caught out of there in 1945, I want to say. I could be wrong on that. In fact, I'll double check just to make sure that I'm not. Yeah, it was 41 pounds in 1925. 41 pounds, 1925.
Wow. And those fish cutties don't tend to get that big, do they? Usually
they don't. The state record here in Utah, where I live in Utah, was caught in the same time frame, 1950, sometime in the 1910s. I know that. It was caught back then. It was 25 pounds, I believe, was the state record. But that was a type of cutthroat that doesn't exist anymore. It was a blend we've taken to referring to it as a strawberry cutthroat. It came out of Strawberry Reservoir. And it was a mix of, I believe it was a mix of Colorado River and Yellowstone cutthroat trout. So that kind of played into why it grew so big. But the Pyramid, they're all Lahontan cutthroat, and you're familiar with that, the whole story about their being on the brink of extinction and coming back and everything associated with that, or not?
I know a little bit, but it would be really cool for our listeners to know about that. But also, we don't have cutthroat here. So How would you describe a cutthroat in comparison to a rainbow trout? How would they see the difference? Obviously, I guess the name gives a clue away, but
a little bit, yeah. But the cutthroat are my favorite trout, so I'm going to be a little predisposed to loving on them. So fair warning, I guess. No, as far as that goes, though, it's a cutthroat generally. I mean, this is not an absolute rule. There are no absolutes in fly fishing. But generally, these cutthroat tend to have a little bit darker tan bodies, almost. A lot fewer spots than most strains of rainbow trout. You do get some strains of rainbows that don't have a whole lot of marking, a whole lot of spotting. And then the big difference you're going to see, obviously, aside from the base color and the spotting pattern, is the coloration on the trout itself. The gill plates are not always, but usually colored up. Variety of reds, oranges. You even get some pinks in some of them, depending on which ones you're fishing for. So they're really gorgeous fish. And then what gives them their name is right below their jaw, right below the mandible, I believe, is a big bright red or orange slash that looks like blood just about. So that's why it got the name cutthroat.
And so you said where in Pyramid they were going to become extinct, were they? Or was
Yeah.
that in the
So,
area in the state or just in the lake there?
well, we had all the industrialization of America, especially in the West. We had that happen in the late 19th century and going into the 20th century. And Nevada, especially, saw a lot of that. There was a lot of mining going on in Nevada. That was the big thing that drove it, was all the mining. So you have that. You have people coming in. You have people settling, and no clue about our true impact on the environment at that point in history. We just didn't know any of that. So what happened is they ended up diverting the Truckee River, which is what dumps into Pyramid Lake. And the Truckee just dead ends right there in Pyramid Lake. That river got diverted a ton for irrigation and other purposes, and then a lot of waste was put into it. And then the cutthroat themselves, since they were so stinking big, they got harvested a lot. And there's no bag limits at that point. There's no artificial flying lure only regulations at that point. And it was, the 1890s. They didn't have that back then. And ended up being just outfished, and we thought that they were gone by about the 70s. I want to say 1970s. It was thought that the lake strain of Lahontan trout, which is just a tiny bit different genetically than other Lahontan trout that are in some of the creeks and streams in the area out there, just a little bit different genetically, enough so that we thought we'd lost the lake strain forever. And then in the 90s, they found a remnant population in a little stream on Pilot Peak, which is right on the Utah-Nevada border. And nobody really knows how they ended up there, but they rescued them. They took them, and they could tell they weren't Great Basin, or not Great Basin, Bonneville cutthroat trout, which is what you would expect to see out there. Did some genetic testing against some of the old skin mounts that they still had of the big cutthroat out of Pyramid Lake. It found out it was an exact genetic match. So they saved them. A year after they pulled those fish off the Pilot Peak, wildfire came through. So 1 year later, if they had done it, we wouldn't have the fish that we have in there today.
Wow. That was meant to be, wasn't it?
Yeah. So they brought them back and raised them in hatcheries for a while, started planting them, and now we're seeing, I've seen, I want to say I've probably seen 30 separate 20-pound fish caught this year.
Dear me.
20 plus pound fish. So.
And how big is Pyramid Lake, to get a sense of?
It's just
huge, I guess.
Yeah, it's a really big lake. It's 125,000 acres.
Wow.
I have no clue how to convert that over to something, something useful.
Huge. And it's really interesting. The reason I'm sort of asking these sorts of questions is because some of the methods that I've learnt about that they're fishing happened here a little bit as well. And I think they've sort of found their way by their own, by angler skill, really, more than anything else. But I know a little while back on the reservoirs here that guys, to get out a little bit further, were taking, and it didn't happen for that long. I don't know if it's one of these health and safety things, or if it just, the reservoir people didn't like it because it made it a little unfair. But they were taking either milk crates or they were taking step ladders and then casting out into the lakes that way. And then I read something, I think, recently saying that they fish the booby fly as well, which I think probably came from the reservoir scene over here as well. So it's kind of interesting that those techniques have been adopted for completely different fish, but fished in a similar sort of way.
Yeah, and it really is, because I didn't know that booby flies were a thing over across the pond in your neck of the woods. I thought that was a unique to Pyramid Lake kind of a thing.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
finding out that it wasn't was pretty cool.
yeah, it might be just one of those wonderful things that ingenious fly angler there has thought, oh, I've got this closed cell foam. Let's try and see what happens. And because I think they're fishing on a similar way, aren't they? With a fast sinking line, short tippet, and letting it float off the bottom. And
Yep.
yeah, so that's how they
That's the
probably fish
exact
them
it.
here. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really, really interesting. But it's phenomenal fishing, super big fish. And I guess,
Well, phenomenal is relative. I mean,
right.
I was there for, let's see, I was there Thursday. I got there Thursday night. We fished Friday, Saturday. So we fished 2 days solid. And we picked a really good day, a really good set of days, we thought. And there was no moon, so they weren't feeding at night, which helps you out a ton. And it had been cold and stormy, but we were there and the weather was just balmy and just nice. And when you're at Pyramid, you want the worst weather possible. It fishes better in bad weather. We didn't even have chop on the water half the time.
Yeah.
So it's just glass and you can see those fish for a mile. And when you're standing on a step ladder, they can see it for 5 miles. So
Yeah.
you didn't really get a whole lot of action until the last couple hours of daylight or the very first few hours of the day. I ended up getting skunked 2 days. I didn't catch a thing. I had one solid take, set the hook, and I don't know, it just unbuttoned. I don't know what I did. My buddy I think he caught 12 over the 2 days, including one that was 29 inches.
Wow.
And we figured it was probably about between 10 and 11 pounds.
Wow. Wow.
So really,
And
really solid fish.
yeah, special fish. And I suppose you're going in there for the hours for that memorable fish, aren't you? That potential fish of a lifetime
Yeah.
to fish there. And so is that because I've sort of been aware, it's been on my radar, or I've been aware of it for, I don't know, 2-3 years, something like that. But has word got out and is it densely populated with anglers now? I suppose it's so big, you can get lost there as well. But
Yes and no. Everybody knows about it. It's not any kind of a secret. I don't think it ever really was a secret as much as it was just figuring out how to make it accessible to a lot of different anglers. I think that was the big key that the guides there had to figure out was, okay, we figured out how to do this, but how do I explain this more technical lake fishing when you're not fishing chironomids under an indicator, which is what we were doing when we were there. When you're not fishing it that way, how do you do it? How do you teach people who maybe don't have that skill set? And then on top of that too, we didn't have the fish the size that are in there right now. We didn't have that 20 years ago either. So of course, as they get bigger, you're going to go there. And there were quite a few people there that weekend that I was there. One of the best bar bands I've ever seen play.
yeah,
It was a band of because the lake's on the Pyramid Lake Paiute Reservation, so Native American reservation, and the singer of the band was Native American, and they did some of the best covers of Waylon Jennings and Creedence Clearwater Revival I've ever heard. It was incredible.
nice,
it was
nice.
it was cool, but there were a lot of people, especially the north end of the lake. Gets a lot of attention. But we fished down on the south end of the lake, a couple of spots that fewer people, and you're there for the opportunity at catching a 20-pound fish.
Yeah, yeah.
And your bad day is going to be, and I say bad day, but I made the remark, I think on my first trip to Pyramid, the first day, it was a couple of years ago, the first time I went out there, and I caught a 21-inch cutthroat on the literal last cast of the day. And I remember bringing it in. I didn't even want to take a picture of it because I was like, it's just a dink. And then I had to stop and wait. Where else in the world can I catch a 21-inch cutthroat and say, oh yeah, it's just a dink. We don't need to just put it back. I was upset that I caught that. Where else in the world do you get upset over a 21-inch trout?
Yeah.
So it's all perspective, and you have to remember that when you're there. I think.
Mm.
too, because it's easy to get caught up in it. And anything, you can have a really, really special fish. If you want to go, or if you go, you're going to catch, unless you're me, apparently, because I get skunked. But, you can get into 22, 25-inch fish. You can bank on that. And if that doesn't get you excited, then you're in the wrong sport. So.
And they're such a beautiful fish as well, aren't they? They really are.
They are.
Yeah.
They really are.
Yeah. So before I take you back to where fishing started, while we've been talking about this and where we've been talking off mic, so for you, from a fishing point of view, is it moving water or is it still water that floats your boat?
Oh, moving water, for sure.
Cool, man.
I blame that on the fact that I can't fish lakes. I'm just not good at it. And I've told myself I'm not good at it for so long that I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to get adequate fishing lakes. But there's just something about, I prefer the constant movement and constant action of rivers and streams. So, and that's what I grew up learning how to fish on. I grew up learning to fly fish on a stream that's not more than 20 foot wide.
Nice.
At its widest. A lot of big browns in there, though.
Yeah.
So my grandpa has one on his wall. Pulled out of there. It was a 26-inch brown. He pulled out of there.
Wow.
Don't know why he put it on his wall, but he's not a very good person. But he's not a very good person for a variety of reasons. So that included.
Yeah. So before we're going back into your lineage, I'm talking to you in Utah at the moment. Is that home for you? Is that where you're from? Is that where you spent your youth and everything else?
Yep, born and raised. So I've had family here since 1847.
Right.
When the first of the Mormon pioneers came west and settled this area. My fifth great grandfather was with them, the party that came in here. So we've been here, 1847 has been a long time. So this is my home, and I know these mountains, and I love these mountains, and I've had the opportunity to live other places, and I can't do it. I get back home, I see the mountains, and it's just there's a piece to being up there and knowing I'm the only guy on this particular stream that speaks to my soul in a lot of ways that it's really hard to articulate. That's part of why I write about it, because I'm picking at that theme of this is amazing. This is something more than just catching fish. How do I express that? How do I capture that? How do I convey that to other people to hopefully show them why it's such a thing that I spend so much time and money and effort doing.
And it's an interesting one. We'll go off in a little direction now, in that it's really fascinating. What you're saying resonates deeply with me as well. And we'll come into social media a little bit on this way, because one of the other podcasts I did, we talked a little bit about it. And sometimes it's about more than the grip and grin, isn't it? It is.
Oh, yeah.
And, if you're listening to this, you probably get that as well. But trying to explain how those fish get to you, but the places that you go, and I know the places I've been, if I wouldn't have fly fished, I'd never have been there in a million years.
Yeah.
And that's part of it as well, isn't it? And like you say, the solitude, but sometimes the companionship and friendship that you spend. And there's my dog whacking on the door there, wants to go out and pee, but he comes with us. He understands the word fishing. That's part of it, him being there. And it is that whole big part of it, isn't it, that means so much to us, isn't it?
It is. It really is. And I look at where I'd be without it, and I don't know who I'd be without this being such an integral part of my life. And one of my best friends is in my life because of fly fishing. If it hadn't been for fly fishing, he and I wouldn't know each other. And he's flying down here in 2 weeks. We're going to go take off for a whole week and go fish.
Nice.
All over. We're hitting the green and then the big hole, and Utah, Wyoming, Montana. Might mess around a little bit in Idaho while we're at it, but we're just getting in the truck and seeing where the road goes.
Isn't that cool? Big Hole is, I went all the way over to Wisdom so that I could catch a grayling in the Big Hole. And then we had to go back again. I went all the way over. I don't know if you know Wisdom.
Oh, I know Wisdom. Yep.
Yeah, and the burger place there with those huge great burgers and everything else, and the stream up from the main town there, and we were jet lagged, and I just got in, and I met my friend Ray, and I said I've got to catch a grayling, so we drove all the way over from Missoula, stayed there for a couple of days, just so I could catch a grayling, and I did it, and I was absolutely thrilled. And
that's awesome.
That was amazing. And funnily enough, I was going to talk to you about the Green as well, because one time I fished in Colorado, and that's an amazing river, isn't it?
Oh, there's a lot of rivers in the world, and then there's the Green.
Yeah.
And I have not fished, seen, nor heard of a river that holds a candle to the Green.
Yeah. Putting it into context, I think, isn't it? And I think, I've no idea how many trout my home stream has per mile. It's probably not a huge amount. I know the Yellowstone's something like 8,000.
Yeah.
The Green's 20,000 or something per mile, isn't it?
That's 20, what it was back in the late 90s, early 1000s. Since then, we're down to about 12,000 per mile, 12 to 15,000 per mile. However, the average trout size is about 17 inches.
Wow.
So you've got 12,000 fish per mile. The average fish is 17 inches long. We're seeing a lot more very large fish. Just last fall, I was floating the lowest section of it in Utah that you can float before, because the Green kind of snakes into Utah right at the northeast corner of the state, and then goes out into Colorado where the Yampa River dumps into it, and then it horseshoes around back into Utah and dumps down all the way into Lake Powell where the Colorado River comes into it. So we're in that section in Utah, and my buddy, I was in the back of the boat, he was in the front. We were fishing cicadas. It was that time of year. So it wasn't fall, it was spring. Spring or summer last year. So we were fishing cicadas. We were having a blast, and this fish just absolutely annihilates his cicada, just like a freight train hitting a plastic box. Man, it just blew up, and that fish just takes off. And it was the kind of fish where I reeled my line in, even though I'm in the back of the boat. I was like, I don't want any part of him losing this fish.
Yeah.
And we were fishing dry dropper rigs. That's how I fish 99% of the time out here. And as he's bringing this big fish in, and it was probably about 25-inch fish. That's a really good fish. As he's bringing it in, another smaller fish came up and grabbed the dropper. And just, I don't know how, but the physics of it, whatever, black magic, karma, whatever you want to call it, that little fish popped the big fish off. And that little fish, I say little, that little fish was 17 inches. So
yeah, it's all relative.
we were all pretty bummed about it, though. It was amazing to watch to watch a fish that big come up to the top, first of all. You usually don't see fish that large eating off the top, and so when you do, it's a pretty rare treat. I think the biggest fish I think I've caught on a dry fly is a 24-inch rainbow, and I think it was a tank, though. It was probably 6-7 pounds. It was just so stinking fat. So
wow, that's amazing. And one of the things, before we go back to find out a little bit more, I told you we go off in all sorts of directions.
No worries.
In the UK, we don't have drift boats. And
really?
The first time I think they tried it in Scandinavia. I don't know if the company's still going. There was a company 10, 12 years ago ran some drift boats, but I don't know if they're still going, if that works. But we don't have them at all. And the first time I fished in a drift boat was the Roaring Fork. The guide hadn't turned up in the morning. It was a birthday present for my friend while we were out. We'd been fishing the Frying Pan, and
how'd you like the Frying Pan?
It's an awesome river, and he'd got this half day and the dude hadn't turned up in the morning, turned up in the afternoon. We said, no worries, we'll go and fish the frying pan in the morning for a bit, and met him, and he was hungover and everything else. My legs were bruised from where he kept hitting all the rocks and stuff like that. And then I took a group of guys down to Montana, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, something like that. And I said, the first time you'll do it, because I didn't get it the first time, I said, you might feel the same about it, but once you get into it, it's really good fun, isn't it?
Oh,
really
yeah.
Good fun.
Yeah, I love wade fishing. I love wet wading. I have a visceral reaction to wearing waders. I dislike it strongly. So anytime that I can just throw my wet wading stuff on a go, that is the way to live. But these bigger rivers, there's no better way to tackle them than from a drift boat.
Yeah. No, I've really enjoyed it. And the last time I went over to Montana, I had a day and I had my daughter with me, who's a photographer, and a guide friend, Matt Long, took us out. And we just had a ball, and it was really, really good fun. It's just such a great way of covering water and seeing water and seeing everything that goes with it as well. That I've done many trips over there with just wading as well. But if I get the chance to go in a drift boat, I'll certainly do it. It's great fun. But let's take you back then. So has fishing always been part of your life? Has it been in your life?
Yeah, it has. My grandpa fly fished and taught my dad how to fly fish. That's the only good thing my grandpa ever did with his life. That's what I continually tell everybody. So, and before anybody hates on me for being too mean to him, he'd agree with me. So, then my dad taught me how to fish, and I remember I've heard this story a ton. When my mom was pregnant with me, my dad, they were still both going to university here in the States. And it was up in northern Utah, Utah State University. And the Logan River that runs right through there is one of the few free-flowing rivers left in the West. There's no dams on it, which is beautiful. And the fishing's just ridiculous. And my dad was up there 3 or 4 nights a week while my mom was pregnant with me. And apparently my mom had this recurring dream until I was born, actually, that she'd go to the hospital and have her kid, but it was a fish and not a kid.
Yeah. Cutthroat, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. And so she was, I've heard that story a ton. And then I was 5. The earliest memory I have of my dad and I doing something together, just the two of us, was wet wading with him on the family stream, I call it, because it's this little creek about half an hour from my house where I grew up. And my 5th great grandfather founded the town that sat there on the creek. So even though land ownership laws don't work this way, I like to lay ancestral claim to the river. In Utah, our stream access laws are absolutely asinine and unconstitutional and just unfair. There's nothing good about the stream access laws in Utah. So that's a whole nother discussion right there. The short of it is, if a river flows through private property, you cannot be in that river because the landowner owns the stream bed as well. It's not that way in Montana. It's not that way in Idaho. So it's really frustrating. But because we'd been fishing that forever, we just always kind of had access to it. We just went wherever we wanted to go. And I remember being 5 years old, standing there with my dad, watched him catch a fish. And when he released it swam downstream right over my feet. Now, I probably wasn't even wearing shoes, right? And I remember he told my mom that we were going to go to the grocery store and we went fishing instead. So it was perfect. And I remember watching that fish slide over my feet and watching my dad whipping that fly rod back and forth. And my dad must have been some kind of masochist, though, because he gave a 5-year-old a fly rod and let me try. And I don't remember what happened, but you can only imagine what probably happened. That stream is known for eating your flies. It's lined with willows so thick It's ridiculous. So that was the earliest memory I ever had of it. And then, yeah, since then, I've always fished. I didn't always fly fish. I spent a lot of time growing up spin fishing with conventional gear, doing a lot of jig fishing. Caught some really big fish on jigs. And I think it was sophomore, junior year of high school out here. I just made the switch. I just wanted to try it. And once I made that switch over and wanted to do it, I just haven't gone back. I still fish conventional gear on a pretty decent basis. We'll go out and troll for salmon, freshwater salmon here. A lot of the lakes here in Utah have them, so we'll go troll for them, and that's a lot of fun. We'll do that for the big lake trout as well, the big Mackinac, and that's a lot of fun. And every now and then, it's nice just to grab the spinner rod and go chuck some jigs for bass and bring some bass home for dinner. So, but it's almost all fly fishing now at this point.
Yeah, and I guess your father was a big influence for you, and aimed you in that direction of fly fishing. And was it him you were fishing with a lot in your early years, or was it a friend? Yeah.
Yeah.
And
if it wasn't for my dad, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for my dad, I wouldn't be half of the somewhat decent individual that I am today. So I owe just about everything to my dad. So
cool. And it's really interesting that it seems to me that in the UK, certainly, and we're talking about people, angler numbers going down.
Yep.
And part of that, I wonder, is that sort of situation that you're describing there doesn't happen, certainly, and I'm only really looking at it from a UK perspective, really, but I'd be interested to know what you think. But nowadays, it seems as though, kids would do those sorts of things with their parents, and you'd go on a camping trip and you'd fish and you'd do those sorts of things. And it feels to me, and it's not so with any knowledge, that in the US that still goes on, whereas children here now, there are lots of other things they do. So they might go fishing with their parents, they might ride a bike with their parents, because cycling's a big thing. I'm sure it's the same over there as well. But there's lots of other things that kids do now, that it might be piano lessons, it might be doing whatever it is on their computer, watching YouTube.
I wish it was piano lessons, and at least it's constructive. But
yeah,
we're seeing the same thing over here.
Cool. That's interesting to hear. Yeah.
The neighborhood I live in right now, there's a lot of younger kids, and I can count on one hand the amount of times I see them out riding their bikes or playing in the street or whatever. I'm not that old either. So growing up, that's all we did. I mean, we had our days where we just sat and played Xbox for 12 hours, but that's part of being a kid, right? Probably 80% of our time was spent out in the woods doing stuff. Because I grew up in a town of about 5,000 people, and it's all farming and ranching. So, that was our entertainment. So taking our bikes up the canyon and going fishing. We used to strap our fishing poles to our bike handles, pedal up the canyon, fish our way back home. And that's what we did. And that's what we did for fun. We built rafts. We built, when we were 14, me and one of my best friends, we built the most incredible tree fort that has ever been built by young boys ever.
Yeah.
This thing had real glass windows that we acquired from a construction site nearby. And we did a wood floor. We busted up pallets to make a wood floor for this thing. And we framed it. I mean, it had a bedroom, it had a kitchen, it had a dining room, it had a lounge, it had an attic. It was 2 stories, had vaulted ceilings. We even plugged in an extension cord to his house. And so his dogs wouldn't chew it up, we buried it in a PVC pipe all the way out. He was sitting on a couple acres worth of land. So all the way out to the shack where we ran it off on a splitter so we could have the TV and the Xbox and the mini fridge out there.
You're in the wrong game. You should have been in house design.
Apparently, but that's the kind of stuff we did growing up. And
Cool.
I don't see that anymore. I don't see
Cool.
kids doing that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I've talked about it. I won't bother listeners too much, but I've talked about it a little bit before. And I think what's happening is that people are coming back to fishing a little bit later. So they may have done that when they were kids, and then they're coming back in their 30s, 40s, whatever it is, and saying, actually, I want to go catch a wild fish like I used to do, or I want to be outside and be in a river and stuff like that. So it's kind of interesting to see that. And certainly when I was guiding, that's where it used to be. That sort of age group
Yep.
would do that. They could afford to go and have a guide, so they'd come down with their wife and do those things, or the husband would do it and the wife would fish, which it happened as well, which is cool. But I don't know if you want to name names. You don't have to if you don't want to. But your home river, tell us a little bit about that and what it means to you, the size of it, so we can get a sense of where you like to go hang out and go fish.
Yeah, I mean, my home rivers doesn't have fish in it anymore. There's big wildfire. Was it just last summer? I think it was just last summer. 130,000 acres burned, and burned so hot that one of the tributaries to that stream dried up and the rocks in the stream bed cracked.
Wow.
So there's no bug life in it anymore even. And then the subsequent ash flows from mudslides, and the stream doesn't even look like it used to. It's been rerouted so much from all that sediment just getting pushed. So I don't know if I'm ever going to get it back, but it was, if you picture a narrow mountain valley, you've got plenty of those over in your neck of the woods. Narrow mountain valley, decent sized mountains on either side, big meadows where cattle are grazing, and a stream that just kind of lazily meanders through all of that, lined by willows at just about every turn. And it's just one pool to the glide to the riffles to the next pool to the glide and the riffles, just continuously. Full of brown trout. Used to be some rainbows in there and were cutthroat back in the day. There's not cutthroat in there anymore. It's primarily a brown trout fishery. And most of them were 10, 12-inch fish. Nothing to write home about, but occasionally you'd hook into that 15-plus inch fish, and that was a special day on that stream. And it was the perfect place to learn how to fish because the water is gin clear. And in the summer, the weeds grow and the water drops, and so fish are even more skittish than usual. And your presentations, your cast, they have to be perfect. But the stream rewarded you too because the dry fly fishing was so good. If you put a fly in a spot where a fish should be, fish would take it like 80% of the time. And the hatches were just prolific. You'd start out with your blue wings, move into your caddis, stoneflies. There was even salmon flies on the stream.
Oh, the big boys.
Yeah, most people don't know there's salmon flies in that neck of the woods, which is awesome. I want to keep it that way because I had a banner day on another stream near there last year on salmon flies. And then it gives way to crane flies and October caddis, and then back, pale morning duns, and then back to blue winged olives. So you get the whole gamut of that, and it's just, if I could build a trout stream, it'd be that one.
That's kind of cool, isn't it? I'll tell you what was really interesting for the listener. We're actually doing this on, it's like a FaceTime type thing. So I can see Spencer. And when he started describing that, he closed his eyes as he was taking us there. So it's kind of nice. And I remember there's a time when I used to get hacked off with stuff and I'd just shut my eyes and take myself up a similar sort of stream.
Yep.
And that would be a good place to go to as well in your mind. But salmon fly, amazing. I've never been lucky enough to fish one of those hatches. But what about hoppers and things like that? Would you be fishing hoppers on there?
Oh yeah, that's a given. So
Yeah, yeah. We do,
hoppers.
again, not to that degree. We don't have it. So I've caught some fish on hoppers previously, but not when they're really hard on them. But the salmon fly and those big stone flies just seem amazing hatches.
It's ridiculous with what it is. It's just, I don't know. I've gotten to the point where during a lot of those hatches, I have to remind myself to just stop and take a look for a minute. Like out on the green, we get carpet hatches, blue-winged olives,
Right.
where the slack water, it is just a carpet of bugs. I'm not exaggerating. You cannot see the water. It is just bugs. So fish are rising, and they're not taking just one bug. They're taking a mouthful, a couple dozen of these at one time.
Wow.
And if you don't stop and appreciate that, you're missing a point, I think, because who else is going to see that?
Yeah.
Who else is going to be in that position to see that and record that and to share that story?
Yeah. Nice.
No, nobody else is. Nobody else is going to be out there doing it. And that's one of the cool things about this is that we're in positions that not hardly anybody else gets into.
Yeah. Yeah. No, hallelujah to that. I'm with you on that. Now, so you're fishing your stream.
Yep.
And I think that you like building rods as well. And so what are you sort of fishing with? Are you fishing with, I thought do you build bamboo rods as well?
Yeah, I do.
Cool. So that's what you'll be fishing with. Is it primarily that's what you like to fish with, bamboo rods, or
I love fishing bamboo. I fish just about everything. I don't love fiberglass. It's having a big renaissance here in the States. I don't know about over in the UK, but over
to a
here,
degree, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, it's every rod maker's coming out with new glass rods now. They have to. And it's great for the people that like it. It's awesome. I've just never really fallen in love with it the way that I fell in love with bamboo. And most of my rods, I write a lot of gear reviews. That's what pays the bills. And if you're going to write about anything related to the outdoors, gear reviews are the way to go. And I fish a ton of rods, and most of the rods I own are old rods. So my favorite rod, well, I don't really have, I can't say I have a favorite. One of the coolest rods I have, though, is a Winston from the early 80s, right after they'd moved to Twin Bridges, Montana. 8.5 foot, 2-piece, 6-weight. And that thing is just, it's a revelation casting that. The heavens open, you hear angels singing. The second coming is nigh when you were fishing that rod. It is something else to behold. It is just ridiculous. So,
yeah.
But no, usually a shorter rod. Like my favorite bamboo rod for that creek's a 6 foot 4-weight. It's actually a JS Sharps of Aberdeen featherweight Scotty.
Yeah.
So.
I've usually got one on the wall here. I have a 8.5 foot 5-weight Scotty on the wall, but I don't know where I've put it. It's sort of for display. I used to fish it a little bit as well. But what's your favorite? Well, let's geek out a little bit more. What's your favorite taper? What do you prefer?
Oh man. And well, Everett Garrison is the greatest rod builder who ever lived, followed very closely by Tom Morgan. I had the chance to know Tom very well before he died a couple of years ago. And a favorite taper, I mean, it's hard to beat the Garrison 206. And then I want to say it's I don't want to give the wrong number.
You've impressed me with your knowledge of tapers anyway, and from numbers. I know I like Leonard's and I like Garrison's, but I think I do like Leonard's. But
Leonard's great. The 209 is not a bad one. That's a 7.5 foot 5-weight. It would be the 212 is a great rod. It's his. It's not the 206. Now I'm gonna lose my mind. It's
Yeah.
a 7.5. It's a 7.5 foot 4 weight. That's
Right.
my, and I've got
Yeah.
the book sitting around here somewhere. I'd find it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anything
And
by
it's
Garrison.
And it's really interesting that you mentioned about Winston. And on a trip, I did a road trip with my daughter, and we traveled around Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, and we happened to be on whatever the motorway was or the freeway there. And I said, "Oh, Twin Bridges. That's where Winston are. Let's go have a look."
Yep.
And so we drove. It was about 40 miles or 50 miles. I can't remember. I think we were in Jackson and happened to be out that way. And I said, "Oh, let's go and have a look."
Yep.
And I think it's the Jefferson. I ended up fishing there for a morning. But it's fascinating seeing these places. And it was a Sunday, so they weren't open. But they're not what people imagine. These companies, they're not huge, great companies, are
Nope.
they?
No.
And isn't it Blue Oyster next door? Is it Blue Oyster Bamboo Rods almost next door, or just up the road a little
No,
bit?
that's Sweetgrass.
Sweetgrass, sorry.
Yeah, Blue Oyster's down in Georgia, I believe.
Oh, right. Yeah. But they're not huge, great concerns that you may think, it's kind of sobering to see that, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I've been to Winston's place quite a lot. I do a lot of work with those guys up there. They're good people. And I know I've been to one of the other rod builders' places, but even Sage, their place isn't huge. It's a little bit bigger because they've got Redington and Sage in the same place. Even though most Redington rods are made overseas, but a lot of the repair or finish work or whatever is going to be done there in Washington. So it's it's really interesting to see just how small everything is.
Yeah, I went to Able when they were in the old place.
Yeah, when they
On the
were
airfield there.
yeah.
And that was tiny, wasn't it?
Yeah. They're out in the same place as Ross now, out in Montrose,
Yes.
Colorado.
Yeah, and I guess Scott as well. They're in Montrose as well, aren't they?
Yeah, I don't think they're all in. I don't think
in the same month.
Yeah, I don't think they're in the same company, but yeah. So it's
yeah. So you alluded to the writing, and it would be really interesting to know a little bit more about that. What are you doing, and what have you done? How did that come about? What are you doing with that?
So I've been writing about fly fishing for the better part of the last decade. I actually started out writing about sports. I was covering the NBA over here in the States of the Utah Jazz. And I actually have a really good friend of mine not a terribly good friend of mine. I know the guy pretty well though, but he's from Wales and he makes the trip over here every year to watch Jazz games. He flies out here. Pretty interesting character. But I started out doing that because I grew up thinking I want to be a sports writer because I love sports.
Me too. That's what I wanted to do as well.
and
I didn't.
I went into it. Love it. I love it still. I still do. I do some stringer work for the Associated Press in the Salt Lake City area, so I've had the chance to cover Olympic qualifying events for some of the snow sports and some really fun, unique things, college basketball and college football here. Had a lot of fun with it. The American kind of football, not your soccer stuff over there. So I've had a lot of opportunities, but that's what I started out doing was that. Realized it's not what I wanted to do the rest of my life, and I started fishing a lot more. And it's like, well, shoot, I write about athletes. I can write about a fish, can't I? And it was actually harder to get my foot in the door writing outdoor stuff than it was to get my foot in the door in the NBA. So take that for what it's worth, I guess.
Yeah, wow.
But I started out just doing small columns and stuff for local papers, and now I'm the news editor over at Midcurrent, and I'm a regular contributor to Hatch magazine, and as well as Southwest Fly Fishing magazine. And I've had stuff in Field and Stream and Gray's Sporting Journal, and
Wow.
American Angler, and Trout Magazine, and a few others. So what I've been doing, and I'm actually working on a fishing book. I hope it's ready to come out this year. I'm
Wow.
crossing my fingers, but it's going to be called Brook Trout and Bad Dates.
Nice.
So it's a collection of fishing stories from over the last couple of years. So
fantastic. And you got a publisher and everything else?
That's really the holdup right now, because I'm trying to decide, do I self-publish or do I go with a couple of these other publishers that I know? So I'm wrestling between the two choices. One of these days, I'm going to finally make the decision and sit down and write it and do it. But and until then, it's a concept that hopefully is going to come out at some point. So, but yeah, that's what I do now. That's how I make my living. So
fantastic.
Writing about fly fishing. So
and Midcurrent. So I think you've been with them since about January, is it?
Yep, started January 1st.
January. So tell us a little bit about Midcurrent, because I think I've spoken to a few people previous to us recording this, and I said, I'm speaking to Spencer from Midcurrent. Do you know Midcurrent? Yep, I know Midcurrent. And they were real trailblazers, really, weren't they? And as the internet got going, and perhaps you'd tell our listeners, if they haven't heard of Midcurrent, a little bit about it, please.
Yeah, so it's been, and if I get this wrong, Marshall, the publisher, is going to kill me, but I want to say they've been around since 2006. It's either 2006 or 2003. Those numbers are stuck in my head for some reason.
Say 2003 to be on the safe side.
Yeah, exactly. Well, whichever one's correct, Marshall. Just and they've been around for a while. And Marshall has told me on a couple of occasions that one of his close friends has said, there wasn't really fly fishing news until Midcurrent came along. So that's really been the thing. And since their inception, they haven't missed a day of news. So there's always something new about fly fishing every day over at Midcurrent. And another really interesting thing, and Marshall was told that he probably wouldn't succeed with it. People said he wasn't going to make it, but he doesn't ethically support the grip and grin photos that we see. And so we don't run grip and grin photos in Midcurrent at all. Wrap your head around succeeding that way as a fly fishing publication, not running grip and grins.
Well, that's really interesting, because our hard copy mags, we have none, which is really, and that was something I didn't want to preach about it, but I wanted it to be that you could hopefully educate people by them seeing fish photographed close to the water and in the water, basically. So there's no holding the fish out or any of that sort of stuff goes on. And at the back, we have the keep 'em wet principles as well. And without preaching it, but yeah, I didn't know that. And that's really cool to hear as well.
Yeah. And I'm not trying to speak for the powers that be above me at Midcurrent either, but I'm not trying to put words in their mouth. But that is the consensus. It's a lead by example type thing that we wanted to implement. So
yeah. So how can people find, if they haven't found Midcurrent already? How do they find that?
www.midcurrent.com.
Cool. And there's, like you say, it's updated every day. Plenty of content on there, and
all sorts of content. We just ran. What did we run today? I should know this. I'm the news editor, right? It all blends together. Ran a really cool story about a youth fly fishing and fly tying camp in Pennsylvania that's going around this summer. Rio's got some new fly line out. Gear Junkie just had a collection of rod and reel combo kits, a big gear review. And then we actually just featured another one of your podcasts today that ran.
Thank you.
So that's a lot of, and that wasn't planned, by the way, for the listeners. That was
that's really kind.
Truly serendipitous.
Yeah.
But we got a lot of stuff like that. I am trying to focus a lot on the human interest stuff, the stories that are about the people behind fishing. I really like that, and then a lot of useful how-tos. I don't like the stuff that just glosses over and doesn't really take the time to go in depth into different techniques. This is useless information. So I try and make sure that whenever we do have some how-to articles, that it is actually something that is going to contribute to your knowledge of fishing from having read that. It's not just going to cause you to scratch your head and say, okay, what are they trying to talk about? And then obviously the conservation side of things as well.
Yeah.
So very
Brilliant.
important. So
Cool. So hopefully, if you haven't looked at Midcurrent, any of our listeners, it really is a really great resource. Lots of information and interesting stuff on there. Videos as well, I guess, is an interesting part of the world now that
yep.
that seems a given now, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it is. It's always going to be. And I was joking with a couple of my buddies. The fly fishing film tours, the IF4 and the F3T. We were joking we got to rename them the Utah Fly Fishing Film Tour because so many of those filmmakers are from Utah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So Gilbert Rowley, the guys that do I don't know if you saw the Seriously North show about Arctic char. Those guys are all Utah guys. The bull trout piece from IF4 last year, Confluentus, that was guys that are based in Utah. It's not all filmed here, obviously, but it's a lot of guys that are based here. It's really cool. Really cool to see that.
Yeah, yeah. They tried touring one of I think it was the Gin Clear guys came over a few years back, but it just didn't. I don't know why it didn't work. And down in our little neck of the woods, it was in a cinema and there just weren't many people there. And they were super cool films, really interesting. And it just didn't happen. And I don't think there may be the odd one in Hampshire where they bring some films over, but it's not really happened to get big groups of people together, which would be really deeply cool to have that you can, see these films, meet like-minded people and talk about fishing. But I don't know if we're over here just too solitary and like our own company. I don't know, but it's just not really taken off yet. In places like Germany, which you wouldn't necessarily, I know they have trout streams and everything else, you wouldn't assume that would be a fly fishing hotbed. They were saying on that same tour, it was selling out, which is, so I couldn't tell you why it is or what the reason was, but
I think it's because y'all are too stuffy over there in England.
Yeah.
You got the accent. That's it. You're just like the rest of us.
Yeah. While we're on it's interesting talking about, as somebody who's we're 2 years in now, so it's no real time, but a hard copy magazine. Are you still seeing, and I'm like a salmon, I want to swim against the flow, the magazine shuts, so I want to open one, and that's why I brought Fly Culture about, really, to see, and rather than having how-to, their experiences. So there's stories about people fishing, and the friendships and everything else that goes with that. Do you think, or are you seeing still growth? And I subscribe to 2 or 3 American magazines that I enjoy immensely. Do you think there's still a growth area there, or are you seeing a contraction of that and being replaced by electronic media?
I wish I could say I was seeing it replaced by electronic media, but what I'm seeing is poorly written, poorly put together, unhelpful pieces of writing. And Field and Stream just went down to quarterly publications.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I'm told constantly, every time that I pitch a story, our readers don't want to hear a 3,000 word story about a backpacking trip for golden trout in the Wind River Mountains. I said, really? Because over at Hatch magazine, online publication, I pitched that and it's greenlit. The audience isn't that different. So I don't know I do see places like Hatch growing, and I'm not saying that just because I write for them. There has been significant growth since I started writing for them, which, correlation does not equal causation, but, if there's credit to be taken, I'll take a little of it.
Yeah,
Chad, if you're
absolutely.
listening, I hope that
Yeah.
you're appreciative of that. Uh, but, I look at that and I think it's just the same people are running it today that have been running it for a long time. And I think that is leading to a disconnect in communicating what people want to read, what people want to hear about. I open up Field and Stream. Yeah, I want a how to catch big bass in the spring article. I want that. But I also want a story about people doing it.
Hmm.
And you look at Trout magazine just brought John Girac and Bob White back together after Fly Rod and Reel closed up shop, because John and Bob had a column there where John wrote and Bob did the illustrations. Obviously, they had that for years. Then Fly Rod and Reel closed, and Trout magazine just brought it back, and that's what I look forward to in every copy of Trout magazine.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of other great writing in it, but it's all stories. That's why John still has a career at this point. He's what is 72 now, I think, and he's been doing this forever. I got to fish with him last year and talked to him about it all, and he was patient enough to put up with my questions. So, but listening to him talk about it, he's made his whole living writing those stories, and that's really what binds us all. And so it's frustrating for me as a storyteller to see these print magazines going away and blaming it on dropping ad revenues and dropping circulations, because they're not making it worth your time to get and to read. It's not the cost that's a factor. Subscription's like $12 a year, and nobody cares about that. It's the fact that we're not putting quality in it anymore. It's just big hero shots of fish and big deer and big elk and big bear and big moose, and it's become glorified bragging boards.
That's interesting.
And it's frustrating because the younger generation, of which I am a part, we do like that. But on the flip side, the stories are important, the people are important, the places are important. We realize that experience, the experiential part of everything, whether it's hunting or fishing, that's important. And that's what keeps us coming back to it. There's always going to be a subset of people, and I just wrote a column railing about this, that are only going to care about getting the Instagram shot. Yeah, I can name half a dozen people off the top of my head right now who that's why they go fishing, and I just want to punch them in the face.
Yeah.
Like, you don't get it, and you keep hot spotting every river. Shut up, go home, tie flies, and don't fish, please. But I look at, that aside, I look at all the rest of this, and I think, we're missing the mark here. We're missing the angle as communicators. We're not taking advantage of the millennial generation, which deserves most of the aspersions cast at it. As a member of the millennial group, I can definitely say that, yeah, we deserve a lot of the heat we take. But there is an appreciation for storytelling. There is an appreciation for stories. There is an appreciation and a love and a respect for people and different cultures and different things, and learning from different people and different cultures and different things. And that's just not being told in our outdoors literature for whatever reason.
It's interesting you talk about those things, and we've, with our little magazine that we've tried, we don't have how-tos.
Mm-hmm.
We have no adverts. And so what we decided to do was charge a little bit more.
Yep.
and not rely on advertising, so that we could be independent, and then we can say or do exactly what we want,
Yeah.
yet say, look, we're going to charge you more, but you get content.
Yep.
And it's not how-to content. It is those sorts of stories about what it means to us, where we go, and who we spend time with when we're on the river, sort of thing. And it could be anywhere in the world. As we're UK-centric, but it could be, I've got a piece coming up in Mongolia.
Yep.
I've got a lovely piece from Ryan Sparks, if you know Ryan. He's in the next issue coming out, who is a writer like yourself as well for magazines and things like that. And I thought that's the sort of stuff I like to read. And it sounds as though there is that sort of, and the sense I'm getting is that that's what people want. There are so many great resources for learning how to be there in a magazine. We couldn't, or I didn't feel I could compete with that. So we went our own little way and decided to be just a little bit different for the UK point of view, certainly. Yeah. Anyway, so that's been interesting. But how does fishing feel to you right now? And I've been, and apologies to our listeners again, that I do talk about the big spike that we had in the 70s and 80s. And of course, in the US, and what we're doing is we're seeing those people who took that up on the Stillwater boom on the reservoirs. Those people are getting a little bit older now, so they're not fishing so much. So numbers of anglers are down as a result of that as well. So we're seeing that flattening of the spike. I guess you guys had that big spike 91 when the film came out.
Yeah,
Do you think you'll see something similar, that you might see a flattening of the spike?
We're seeing it already. We're seeing it already. Yeah, our participation numbers are in the toilet. Worse for hunting than for fishing, but yeah, we're seeing it now. It's here.
And what do you think the reason for that is?
Cost and urbanization. Because when the film came out, as much as I dislike the film, and I don't dislike the film as a movie, but I dislike all the people it put on my rivers. And the fact that now, anybody I meet, what do you do for a living? I write about fly fishing. Oh, have you seen a river runs through it? Yes, I have. I talked about that movie incessantly.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say it's a dislike, and more just to warm me out. But no, I see the cost of the urbanization, because even back then when it came out, we weren't nearly as urbanized then as we are today. And I look at it and think, I want to say more Americans live within urban sprawl than rural areas now, and it's been that way for a few years. So you don't have trout streams that you can just go to. Like I grew up, I ride a bike to a trout stream, right? I grew up doing that. We don't have that anymore for a lot of kids. And then the cost factor too, because we've done a really good job. You can get a really great rod and reel for not too much money these days. Orvis has got, I think their entry level stuff is the best in the business, but Fenwick has an amazing, that Fenwick Ados, that is just $190 over here in the US. I don't know what that equates to over there in England.
170 quid, 170, something like that. Yeah.
Phenomenal rod. Just ridiculous. So good. Oh, I have so much fun with it. And
it shows sorry.
No, you're fine. And
I was going to say, shows how what a big part of fly fishing that the UK is, that we don't even get Fenwick here.
Yeah.
We don't, Winston, I think you can find. St. Croix, you can't really get.
Really?
Yeah, you can't get those.
Fishing with St. Croix.
Yeah. So we don't, and I guess those guys don't tend to look at us as a meaningful marketplace, really, I guess.
Huh. That's interesting. But you can get a lot of really great rods for not too much money. It's everything else. It's all the accoutrements to it. It's it's the waders, it's the boots, it's the line, it's the flies, and then you got to figure out how to read water and you've got to figure out hatches, and you've got to figure out, where do you stand? How do you set? How do you cast? How do you land a fish? There's so much more that goes into it than just dunking a worm and sitting in a lawn chair.
Mm-hmm.
And not that I have anything against doing that. I've still done that. If I know I'm going fishing just to bring dinner home and I just want to sit there and read a book instead of actually do something, I'll go dunk a worm or two. Got nothing against that. Fish taste great. I'm going to eat them. So, but it's I think that's your biggest barrier. Is cost getting into it. And kids just don't like the outdoors anymore. I don't know what's wrong with them. I blame it on their parents. Their parents are all terrible. So that's what it is. Any parents out there, listen up. Raise your kids right. Don't quit giving them phones. Quit giving them iPads. Quit sitting in front of the TV. Tell them to go play outside. If you don't have an outside, make an outside. I don't care what you got to do. Figure it out. Because our kids are growing up without any kind of appreciation or love for the natural world. They don't care. They don't know the half of it. They don't have any clue the threat that chronic wasting disease poses to deer and elk herds here. I can't remember if elk get it or not, but deer herds definitely here in the Intermountain West. They got no clue about that. And declining elk numbers and the wolf reintroduction to Yellowstone, what that's doing, and the debate around that, the people that love it, the people that hate it. I'm not going to pick a side or get into it, but they don't know any of this stuff. Steelhead are dying. Salmon are dying. We're losing biodiversity by the fistful at this point. And these kids don't care. They're sitting there watching YouTube videos of somebody else playing Minecraft. I mean, what the hell?
Yeah.
I don't get it. And I don't know how we lose that so quickly from one generation to the next. I don't.
It's technology, isn't it? It's just moved so quickly, hasn't it? Yeah. When I was a kid, you got on your bike, you didn't even use a phone, and you knocked for your friends and then got a group together and you fished or you played sport or whatever, and it was easy then.
Yeah, I mean, we'd call each other growing up. We'd call each other, but it was, whose truck has gas, and because whoever's had gas is the guy that got to drive to go fishing or to go play basketball or whatever it was growing up. I mean, like I said earlier, we had our days where we just sat and played Call of Duty for 12 hours because sometimes that's what you want to do. But those days were by far the exception. Most of the days were spent. I remember we went just on a whim. We decided we were going to climb. I grew up on the side of a mountain, and the summit was 9,867 feet above sea level. So on a whim one day, we're like, okay, we're going to climb up the west face of this, which is not recommended. There's a trail to get to the summit from the east face. The west face is just straight up.
Right, yeah.
So we're like, we'll just go up that. And we did. We just went up it. And we found a giant, we call them gopher snakes or blow snakes over here. I don't know what their real name is, but that's what we call them. It was like a 5-6 foot long. It was a big snake, but it's not poisonous.
Yeah.
One of our buddies was deathly scared of it. And he saw it and he jumped up into a tree. And he was screaming. He wouldn't come down out of the tree till we got rid of the snake. And by got rid of it, I picked it up because I love snakes. I picked it up, played with it for like 10 minutes, and then put it down away from the tree so my buddy get out of the tree and continue the hike. It was just, but that's what we did for fun. That was a Saturday, and we went coyote hunting. Oh my, I don't even know how. We ride our 4-wheelers up Main Street with our shotguns or our 22s across our lap to go coyote hunting and rabbit hunting. It's just, that's what we did. And kids today, they see that and they think that's barbaric. And I just don't understand where the cultural disconnect came in, but it makes me sad.
Yeah. Well, let's take this into a happier direction then. So you've got a great road trip plan with your buddy. You don't really know where you're heading. What else have you got planned for this year? Have you got some other cool stuff planned?
Oh, I've always got stuff planned. So, I'm going to be in Alaska all summer.
Nice.
So I'm actually going to be up there driving tour buses all summer. So I'm going to be in the Fairbanks area, which is going to be a lot of fun. And we're going to just fish our hearts out. I'm really, really excited for that. And before I leave for Alaska, I am doing a trip. We're going to hit the Big Hole up in Montana, fishing the green for the blue wing hatch because, it's that time of year and someone's got to go do it. And after we do that, I was thinking about messing around on the Grays or the Gros Ventre. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see what we end up doing. And to southern Utah. Southern Utah fishes really well this time of year, and you have the juxtaposition of the kind of high alpine setting with the Red Rock Desert that everybody associates with southern Utah. So it's a really cool setting to fish in. We're gonna go do that, and probably do my annual Oregon trip in October. Usually up there every fall. And
where do you go? Having been there in October, I kind of got a little handle on it, but where do you head?
oh well, I can tell you, but I'd have to kill you.
Ah, it's one of those. Right? Yeah.
No, we go for the trout fishing. So
Yeah.
as much as we're up in the desert part of Oregon.
Yeah.
So the eastern side of the state. So
Gotcha. Yeah.
nothing too fancy, but we're up there because the browns will spawn, and I'll go up and find a big group of spawners, and then if you look behind them, there's always other fish stacked up. And this particular river's got a really healthy rainbow population. So you go up there in the fall and you fish the rainbows. And you go up in the spring and fish the browns. You trade off because fish are going to be hanging behind the reds, eating eggs and everything else that gets dug up. Yeah. You leave the fish that are spawning alone. You don't mess with them. And then you just catch the fish that aren't spawning. And it's just a blast. So we usually go up there for that. And I'll probably end up doing some random trip. I'm going to drive from Utah to Alaska, so I'm going to drive through Canada. So I know I'm going to be fishing all through there. So I'm not sure where yet, but I know it's going to take me longer than 5 days to get there. It's going to probably take me about 10 because I'm going to fish my way up. So
I think you got it sus, Spencer, haven't you?
Yeah.
You got it organised, haven't you?
Yeah, a little bit more put together than I look, I guess.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So we're going to start wrapping up. We've been over an hour now of chatting, which I've thoroughly enjoyed.
Oh, me too.
Where is it you would love to go? Where's your dream destination?
Oh, man, I don't know. Probably Guyana.
Where about? Oh, right.
Yeah, Guyana, South America. Yep.
Right.
And
what would that be? Peacock or
Arapaima, peacock, wolffish, arowana. That is so different from anything I've ever done that I just want. I want that experience. I want to go for like 3 or 4 weeks. I'm not going to go just for a week. That's too much money to spend for just a week. I'm going to go down there and do it. And that's the trip, I think, that would beat it all for me. I've done Alaska. Mongolia would be really cool for timing. And if I had the chance, I'd like to go to New Zealand. It's not like a big bucket list item for me, just because I don't know. I've got very similar fishing in my backyard, so the fish don't get as big, but it just feels kind of weird to travel all that way for trout, I think. So I don't know. It'll definitely be a cool place, but Guyana, and I'd really love to do a trip though. And I say I wouldn't want to travel all this way for trout, but I'd really love to do a trip over to Europe and fish for browns and marble trout in their native range. I think browns in their native range, that would just be really cool because I'm a big native fish fan. And so being able to catch brown trout in their historic native range would be just that would be a special experience.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm similar to you in that when I go to your neck of the woods, that's, when you mentioned Bonneville cuts, and they've
Yeah.
always been on my list. I think it's debatable now. I think I had a greenback on the St. Vrain, actually.
Really?
So I don't know, because there was some sort of thing about them being reclassified or something, wasn't there? And they weren't. I can't quite remember what the story was now.
Yeah. There was a big mix up. They were stocking what
Yeah.
they thought they were greenbacks, but they were actually Colorado River cuts.
Yeah.
Which the greenback is just a strain of Colorado. It's a whole thing. So yeah.
Yeah, but all those sort of interesting stuff always fascinates me in the subspecies and stuff like that. But Spencer, thank you so much. This has been really cool, and listening to talk about fishing and for us over here to get a different view on it has been really, really fascinating to listen to. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
For our listeners, midcurrent.com. So have a look, and you'll see some of the writing on there. And you write for Hatch magazine as well.
Yep.
So they can find some of your work on there as well.
Yeah,
so,
my most recent piece was the Tiger Trout Takeover was the title of it. So
nice.
It's up there on Hatch. You can give it a read, and that piece took a while to write. So I hope y'all enjoy it.
Fantastic. Well, that's the next thing I'm going to do, and the immediate thing I need to do now is thank you so much, because I know you're a very busy man, and I know you were cussing beforehand that you were missing the blue wings as well, because you've got to go and do some other stuff afterwards. So I feel your pain, brother.
Oh no worries. It's not like perfect blue wing weather because it's sunny, but it's warm, and I know, like, I can hear them hatching.
They're calling to you.
So yeah, they want me to go up and fish them, and I can't, and it's gonna rip my heart right out.
Well, Spencer, thank you so much for talking to us. It's been fantastic, and thanks for spending the time, and I really, really appreciate it. So thanks very much. So thank you, everyone, for listening. This has been the Fly Culture Podcast.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.